Well, hello and welcome to Musings of a Texas Preacher Man. I'm Scott Fisher and I'm glad you've chosen to study with me today. Today we're continuing our study of the new heavens and new earth, and our focus on Peter's statement in 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 10 that the day of the Lord will come like a thief. As we saw yesterday, Paul used the phrase when he said in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 2, "For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night." Now again, nowhere in Scripture is the subject of a thief breaking in presented as something good. It's always presented as a warning and mostly associated with the phrase the day of the Lord, which is a day of judgment and destruction. Now Jesus warned his disciples in Matthew 24 verse 43, if the head of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. He's challenging his disciples to remain sober and alert so that the thief will not break into their house and take them by surprise. Today, I want us to take a passage that few would claim has any reference to eschatology. But I think it supports exactly what we've been seeing. Now, in John chapter 9, you'll recall Jesus healed a man who had been blind from birth. It just so happened to be on a Sabbath day. The Pharisees, instead of rejoicing at the miracle, something none of them had ever seen before, they were infuriated that Jesus was, quote, breaking the Sabbath. So they essentially put the blind man who was healed on trial and claimed he had not been healed. He really had not been blind. They brought in his parents and they questioned his parents. Now here's their response. We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. How he now sees, we don't know. Or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age, he will speak for himself. Now that's John 9 verses 20 and 21. Now the very next sentence is critical to understand because it reveals a major theme of the New Testament, a theme that has pretty much been ignored. Now, look what happens here. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him, Jesus, to be the Christ, or anytime I read the word Christ, I insert the word Messiah, anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Now, why do I say that this verse reveals a major theme of the New Testament? And it's actually a theme of the entire Bible. I'll give you a brief synopsis and then we'll seek to prove the point as we go forward. God chooses to enter into a covenant relationship with a man named Abram. Eventually his name is changed to Abraham, and his descendants after him. The blessed bloodline was through Abraham, his son Isaac, and his son Jacob. These three, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are known as the fathers. They're the fathers of Israel. They're the fathers of the faith. Jacob has 12 sons that become what is known as the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, the Old Testament is the story of God's dealings with them and their dealings with him. And throughout the Old Testament story, there's a promise of one who will come, the promised one, the Messiah, who will save his people from their sins and will establish his everlasting kingdom. The history of Old Testament Israel is one of back and forth faithlessness. You can summarize their sin in three parts. 1, idolatry. 2, sexual immorality. And 3, the shedding of innocent blood. Now, these three sins bring continual judgment upon God's covenant people. So much so that by 722 BC, the northern kingdom of 10 tribes, called Israel, is destroyed by the Assyrian army. God's own people had become as his enemy. His wife had become an adulteress, a harlot. Now in 586 BC, the southern kingdom of Judah, home to the city of Jerusalem and the temple, is destroyed by the Babylonian army, and the people are taken captive. 70 years later, they're released, and they return to Jerusalem. They rebuild the wall, the city, the temple, and their longing for the promised Messiah intensifies. And over the next 500 years, they're conquered and occupied by the Greeks and then the Romans, and the story, the longing, the hope, and anticipation of a coming Messiah is growing. They're expecting him. They're expecting a military conqueror. They're expecting a return to the prosperity experienced under King David and King Solomon. They are expecting that Israel will become the chief nation among the nations, and that Jerusalem will be its capital, and their Messiah will sit upon and reign over the whole world from the throne of David. Their majestic temple will be the centerpiece of everything that matters worldwide. That is the messianic hope of first century Jews led by the Pharisees and the chief priests. And it's into that environment that Jesus arrives on the scene, preceded by John the Baptist. And in the 3 years of Jesus' public ministry, he performs miracles of every kind: healings, opening blind eyes, opening deaf ears, healing lepers, raising dead people. Things that had only rarely happened, if ever, in prior times. These miracles were proof that he was the promised one. There was the booming voice that came out of heaven on the day John the Baptist baptized Jesus in the Jordan River. And that booming voice said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." And the whole crowd that was gathered heard it. Jesus claimed to be one with the Father. He claimed to be, "I am," the voice that spoke to Moses from the burning bush. He claimed to have known Abraham. And the Jews, for the most part, completely rejected him. In fact, they hated him. And they plotted from the earliest days of his ministry to kill him. They threatened fellow Jews not to follow after Jesus, or there'd be severe consequences. Loss of friends and family, loss of business, physical persecution and ostracization, and in many cases even death. To the man born blind, it was simple. I was blind from birth, and this man came along and healed me, and now I can see. I want to draw your attention to John chapter 9, verses 30 through 34. The man answered and said to them, he's speaking to the Pharisees, "Well, here's an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears him. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." And the Pharisees answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you're teaching us?" So they put him out It's the arrogance of the establishment. We're seeing the same kind of thing today with the government lockdown of the world economy. We have to do it. There's no choice. Stay home, save lives. We're all in this together. Don't ask questions. Sit down, shut up, and comply. Well, in the next few verses, Jesus goes and finds the blind man he had healed and identifies himself to him. We pick it up at verse 35. Jesus heard that they had put him out, and finding him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Now, that's another term for the promised one or the Messiah of Israel. Do you believe? And he answered, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You've both seen him, and he's the one talking with you." And he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. Now, the last few verses of chapter 9 sets the stage for our focus as we move forward. Pay close attention to the words Jesus speaks. Verse 39. And Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." Now, don't miss that statement. He came for judgment. So the natural question is, judgment of whom? Who did Jesus come to judge? He came to open the eyes of the blind and to blind those who say they see. Verse 40 says, those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, "We're not blind too, are we?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you'd have no sin. But since you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." Now, you cannot read the New Testament and not see the tension that existed between Jesus and the Jewish leadership. Now, I make a distinction when addressing this subject. Jesus' opposition was to the first century apostate Jewish leadership. The man born blind was a Jew. He believed. All of Jesus' followers were Jews. They believed. But the majority of first century Jews during the time of Jesus, most of them rejected him. John 1:11 says, "He came to his own, and his own did not receive him." Their Messiah fulfilled all of the prophecies of the coming Messiah. He performed miracles that had never been seen before. He spoke with authority. He called out hypocrisy. He reached out to all. He came to do two things. One, to open the eyes of the blind. And two, to blind those who say they see. Another way of saying it, he came to save the righteous remnant of his people who were longing for the promised one. And he came to judge the apostates of his people who had for centuries opposed the ways of God and taken advantage of the people and had become to God as God's enemy. Now, this sets the stage for the next 2 days. We're going to continue to unpack all this in depth over the next few weeks. I want to invite you to stick with me. I know that if you've never considered what I'm sharing, it may be shocking to you. It really is a lot to chew on. Carefully study the Scriptures. Allow Scripture to interpret Scripture. We're going to continue searching out the truth. If you're willing to study, to ask questions, if your desires to know the truth, to learn what the Bible actually says, then I invite you to join me right here on Musings of a Texas Preacher Man. I post a teaching 4 times each week on Monday through Thursday. I'll post a link on Facebook and Twitter, and if you click the subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen, you'll be notified whenever I post a new video. Well, I hope you'll go out and make today a great day. Be safe, be blessed, and join me right here again tomorrow.